Hi everybody, on 1st of January 2023, Cristiano Ronaldo officially moved from Manchester United to a Saudi football team named Al-Nassr.
Breaking news, Cristiano Ronaldo has signed for Saudi side Al-Nassr. They have now confirmed it.
Well, for me it's a pleasure to be here.
This is history in the making. This is a signing that will not only inspire our club to achieve even greater success, but inspire our league, our nation, and future generations.
In this deal, Ronaldo is set to be paid $200 million per season, which is 1600 crores per year, which comes to 4.3 crores every single day. And you will be stunned to know that in the past 2 years, Saudi Arabia has literally sucked out the most valuable players in European football.
Al Hilal have signed Neymar, the Brazilian superstar from Paris Saint-Germain.
A dramatic welcome for Karim Benzema as he starts his Saudi football adventure.
Senegalese striker Sadio Mané is delighted to have joined Al-Nassr in the Saudi League.
And suddenly, the Saudi football team has become the biggest football spender in the world with an expenditure of $6.3 billion in sports deals alone. Now, while most people might think this to be yet another set of big money transfers, I have to tell you that Ronaldo's transfer was a defining moment in the economic revolution that Saudi Arabia is pursuing. Because you know what, guys? Saudi Arabia is in some deep trouble.
A slump in global oil prices has Saudi Arabia rethinking its near total dependence on oil revenue.
Saudi Arabia, the world's biggest oil producer, grew slow in the first quarter of 2023.
This is the reason why they are not just buying players but also bidding for the World Cup, and they're also holding some of the biggest sports events in the world. So the question over here is, what are the critical problems that Saudi Arabia's economy is facing? Why are they investing so heavily into football? What is their economic strategy to survive in the 21st century? And lastly, what are the study materials to help you understand the Saudi strategy better? This video is brought to you by Multiple, but more on this at the end of the video. To understand the ROI of this heavy investment, firstly, we need to understand the vulnerabilities of Saudi Arabia. And if you've been following THINKSCHOOL for long, you know these vulnerabilities very well. Number one is their oil dependency, where 80% of their export income came from oil in 2022, and 40% of their GDP depends on petroleum products. Secondly, Saudi's oil reserves are expected to deplete completely in the next 60 years, so they cannot survive beyond 2080. And lastly, we have the mega trend of net zero emissions, where countries are desperately wanting to give up oil. If you look at this graph, you will see that British Petroleum themselves say that if the countries proceed towards net zero targets, the demand for oil will slow down by 71% by 2050. And at the same time, the levelized cost of wind and solar energy has dropped by 60 and 85% respectively. This means eventually oil will become costlier than renewable sources. Now, this is something that everybody knows. But you know what, guys? There is one more problem with the Saudi economy, and that is something called the Dutch disease. Now, this might sound like a medical condition, but it is actually an economic condition. And if Saudi does not recover from this Dutch disease, it will again become a poor desert nation. So the question is, what is this Dutch disease and how is it ruining the Saudi economy? As usual, let's understand this using a story. The Dutch disease was spotted in the 1960s when the Netherlands discovered one of the largest natural gas reserves in the world in a place called Groningen. And in the 1960s, the Industrial Revolution was at its peak. So by default, gas was one of the most valuable commodities in the world. So when the Dutch people knew about the gas reserves, everyone thought the Dutch economy would grow rapidly and Netherlands would become one of the most prosperous nations on earth. But you know what, guys? Surprisingly, it led to the complete opposite of it. As the gas production increased, its manufacturing sector started collapsing. By the mid-1970s, gross corporate investment had fallen by 15%, employment in manufacturing had declined by 16%, and the overall unemployment had risen from 1.1% to 5.1%. The question is, in spite of having the most valuable resource in the world, how did it cause a negative impact in the Dutch economy? Well, as it turns out, when the Dutch started selling gas, the value of their currency shot up. This is because if you wanted to buy gas from the Dutch, you needed to have the Dutch guilder. And when many people started buying the Dutch guilder, the guilder started appreciating rapidly, and this made exports extremely costly. In the Indian context, if we ship an 8,000 rupee product to the US, it would cost the Americans $100 because $1 equals 80 rupees. But suddenly, if 1 USD becomes 40 rupees, then the same 8,000 rupee product will cost $200 in the US, right? So because of the currency appreciation, suddenly the cost of the product shoots up in the export market. And during this time, if the Chinese sold products for $120, then nobody would buy the Indian products at $200, right? This is how, because of currency appreciation, the export product becomes less competitive in the international market. And this is exactly what happened in the Netherlands, whereby because of their currency appreciation, all the export products of the Netherlands became extremely costly. So obviously, when the manufacturing units could not make enough money, they started shutting their shop down. Secondly, if the manufacturers did not shut the shop, since they found it very difficult to do business, they could not pay lucrative wages to the workers. But at the same time, the money in the gas sector was absolutely crazy. So all these workers flocked to work in the gas sector rather than working in manufacturing. And this led to labor shortages in other sectors across Netherlands. And this happened not just for manufacturing, but also for agriculture, textile, and even the services sector, where people started leaving their job to work in the gas sector. So except for oil and gas, all other sectors saw a decline in their growth. And eventually, Netherlands became so dependent on oil and gas that every time oil prices went down, the economy of Netherlands went down. This is the reason why, by the mid-1970s, the gross corporate investment had fallen by 15%, employment in manufacturing had declined by 16%, and the overall unemployment had risen from 1.1 to 5.1%. This is the Dutch disease problem, which is caused due to the discovery of a huge natural resource. And if you look at Saudi Arabia, it's a very similar case, whereby because of the massive oil fields, 80% of its export income came from oil in 2022 and 40% of its GDP depends on petroleum products. Now, although Saudi Arabia has a fixed currency system, when the oil sector was doing so well, no other sector in Saudi Arabia became a significant sector to contribute to the economy. On top of that, Saudi Arabia has a water problem.
The Middle East is rich in oil reserves, providing a huge amount of the world's energy. But what it has in abundance in hydrocarbons, it lacks in a critical resource that is growing scarcer by the year: water.
Saudi Arabia is the world's largest producer of desalinated water. But this process of water desalination is also energy intensive.
The scary fact over here is that Saudi Arabia does not have a single river in the country, and it is surviving on desalinated water, which requires a huge amount of electricity. On top of that, desalination is super costly and emits a ton of carbon. And as we all know, water is literally the most essential commodity for a sector, whether that's agriculture or manufacturing. So making money in manufacturing was and still is very difficult in Saudi Arabia. So when making money from other sectors was so tough and making money from oil was so easy, the country got over dependent on just oil and no other sector became significant. On top of that, apart from the decrease in revenue and the Dutch disease, there is one more issue that Saudi Arabia is facing, which is human rights violation.
Saudi Arabia has a long history of human rights abuses.
Kingdom carried out the largest mass execution in its modern history, putting 81 men to death within a span of 24 hours.
But no amount of money can wash away the stain of the brutal Khashoggi assassination and other human rights abuses.
You see guys, citizens in Saudi Arabia pay zero taxes because the Saudi government makes so much money from oil that they do not need tax money. Now you might think it's a great thing, but unfortunately, the people of Saudi Arabia are paying the price in a different way. You see, because people in Saudi Arabia do not pay taxes, their totalitarian government is not answerable to them. And even citizens are less likely to monitor the actions of its government when they do not pay taxes. And because of this, Saudi's human rights have become a huge cause of concern. There is no free speech, people are not allowed to protest, and anyone who speaks against MBS gets severe punishment. And sometimes, people are even executed publicly. And you know what guys, there is also an infamous incident of a journalist named Jamal Khashoggi. For those who don't know, Jamal Khashoggi was a Washington Post journalist who fled from Saudi Arabia and started criticizing the Crown Prince MBS in his columns. And on 2nd of October 2018, Jamal Khashoggi entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to obtain his documents. And guess what? He never exited the building. And later on, they found out that he was killed and his body was cut into pieces. And this ruined Saudi Arabia's image all across the world.
After a fortnight of denials, Saudi Arabia has admitted that the missing journalist Jamal Khashoggi died during his visit to the country's consulate in Istanbul earlier this month.
Did you order the murder of Jamal Khashoggi?
Saudi Arabia has been a great ally, but what happened is unacceptable.
And lastly, the world has also not forgotten the role of Saudi Arabia in the bloody war of Yemen.
A day of deadly bombing by Saudi-led warplanes has killed at least 80 people in Yemen's capital Sana'a and in an area along the border with Saudi Arabia.
Day in, day out, warplanes from a Saudi-led coalition are taking off for Yemen.
We have air assets from a number of countries in the kingdom, and we have military assets that are on their way to the kingdom to participate in these operations.
So this, combined with the human rights violation, has been a major concern for the image of Saudi Arabia, because of which investors remain very skeptical of their investment. So what are Saudi Arabia's problems in summary? Oil dependency, the Dutch disease, and the image problem caused by human rights violation. This is the reason why Saudi Arabia is investing billions of dollars into football to solve all these problems of the nation.
Recebe de Karim e remata para o fundo da baliza de Atia.
Football is part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030. He wants to shift the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia away from fossil fuels.
See, over the course of 2023, the Saudi Pro League has just been buying players left, right and centre. Cristiano Ronaldo, Neymar, a host of top-level stars.
In Saudi Arabia, of investing in sports.
We're spending a ton on sports, a lot of money.
Well, if sport washing gonna increase my GDP by 1%, and then I will continue doing sport washing.
Now the question is, how can football solve the economic and image problems of Saudi Arabia? Well, the first method is the most obvious of all, which is sports washing. And if you watched our Qatar episode, you know how this works very well. Long story short, every time a nation is accused of doing terrible things, these nations use sports to wash off their image and present themselves as liberal, developed, peaceful and progressive. A classic example of the same is Hitler. Hitler used the Olympics in 1936 to clean up the image of Germany and to suppress the rumors of Jewish persecution. In the modern day, China was accused of using Olympics of 2018 to sports wash its persecution of Uyghur Muslims. And similarly, Russia used the World Cup of 2018 to sports wash its annexation of Crimea and its LGBTQ treatment. So when Saudi Arabia hosts these football tournaments, it's hoping that the world sees Saudi Arabia as majestic, progressive, vibrant and a modern country rather than just a desert nation. And by the way, they haven't just invested in football, but many other sports, including golf and F1 too.
A shocking announcement in the sports world today. The PGA and Saudi-backed Live Golf, formerly bitter rivals, have officially announced a merger.
That Jared Kushner appears to have cashed in on his time in the White House with a $2 billion investment from none other than Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
This is the image solution that football is expected to bring to the table. If this is very clear to you, let's come to the economic solution. People, sports and tourism are set to create something called the multiplier effect in the economy. So let's understand this using an example and you'll be able to understand it better. Imagine a small town that's building a new stadium for $1 million. This is the initial investment. Then while this investment is made, the construction company that receives $1 million will pay its workers, right? So let's say they pay $800,000 in wages and the rest goes into materials that are imported. So the material cost goes abroad. So now the workers in town have an extra $800,000 that they did not have before the construction of the stadium. This is the first round of impact. Now in the second round, these workers who get wages will spend their money. So if they spend 80% of their wages locally on things like food, clothing and entertainment, 80% of $800,000, which is $640,000, will flow into restaurants, theaters and clothing shops. Then in the third round, the local businesses receiving this money would pay their employees and suppliers. So let's say out of $640,000, again 80%, that is $512,000 goes into wages and restocking the goods. This way, the money will keep on circulating in the economy to create a multiplier effect in the local economy. And this 80% of the money that flows into the next round is called as the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now to find the total impact of the original $1 million investment, we need to find the summation of $1 million plus $800,000 in the first round plus $640,000 in the second round, plus $512,000 in the third round, and so on and so forth. And the sum of the series gives us the total economic impact. And to calculate the multiplier effect in the economy, there is a formula which says multiplier equals 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. Here our MPC is 80%, which means anyone who is receiving money is spending 80% on consumption. So the multiplier effect is 1 divided by 1 minus 0.8, which comes to 1 divided by 0.2 equal to 5. So the $1 million of initial investment could potentially lead to a $5 million increase in total economic activity in the town. And this is assuming that 80% of every subsequent income gets spent locally. Now this multiplier effect is very high for sports and tourism, and this is for 3 reasons. The first reason is the spillover effect. So a successful sporting event or a tourist attraction, it leads to a wide-scale global attention and recognition. And this makes the destination very attractive for more tourists and even potential residents. And this in the long term generates very high positive impact on the economy. Secondly, they promote several industries which include hotels, restaurants, clothing, travel, and even entertainment, which are all labor-intensive industries. So the number of jobs created is very high. And lastly, when tourists spend money in the local economy, a lot of money moves into the economy which originally was circulating outside the country. This is how tourism and sports both put together, they create a multiplier effect in the economy. This is how Saudi Arabia is using sports to both clean up its image and recover from the Dutch disease. So the question is, will it be so easy to spend $1 billion and recover the Saudi economy? Well, not really, because there are 4 challenges that Saudis will have to overcome. And before I tell you about the challenges, since we are on the topic of spending, let me tell you about the smartest way to spend for the lifestyle that you want, which is called spend vesting. As the name suggests, it means investing to spend. And here's where we want to introduce you to our partners of today's episode, and that is Multiple, which is the world's first and only spend vesting app. There are several lifestyle expenses every year that we can easily plan, like travel, gadget purchase, and insurance premium payments. How? Through automatic monthly investments. Being a SEBI registered investment advisory, Multiple enables you to auto-invest towards each of these spending goals, and their expert designed recommendation engine gives you a personalized portfolio of direct commission fee mutual funds to achieve these goals. For example, let's say you want to go to Dubai with your family in February. Dubai would almost cost you 1.5 lakhs per person. So if you spend on Dubai trip through bank savings, you save nothing. If you use credit card EMI, you might save up to 5%, but it comes with debt and interest charges. But if you save up on Multiple for the next 5 months, you can get around 16% savings. If you invest 26,321 per month, Multiple's brand partners such as Make My Trip adds 12% or 16,000 to it. Plus, you can generate up to 8% per annum returns through mutual fund investments. And the one thing to note is that mutual funds are subject to market risks, and you must always read all the documents before you invest your money. So you end up paying only 1,31,605 rupees for your 1.5 lakh trip. That's saving 20,000 rupees per person. It's almost like flying to Dubai for free. So if you also want to pay the lowest for all your big spends, download the Multiple app. For the THINKSCHOOL community members, there's a special reward of 300 rupees of digital gold for your first goal. The details are in the description. Firstly, owning and running a football club is not a cakewalk. European clubs have been there for ages, but still, in 2022, some of the biggest clubs of Europe have incurred huge losses. In fact, in a forecast, out of 20 plus clubs, hardly 5 were expected to be profitable. So making money from these investments will be very, very difficult. Secondly, throwing money at clubs or paying hefty fees to get world-class players cannot ensure long-term sustainability of sports tourism or FDI in the country. Because if you look at Europeans, it took them 50 years to build a sustainable ecosystem. So suddenly a few $1 billion cannot substitute their work. Because to build a sustainable sports ecosystem, the country has to work on several basic things like sports education, local league system, and creating a sporting culture within the civilization. Thirdly, when so much money is poured into different sectors, because Saudi Arabia has 37% migrant population, which forms a majority of the country's workforce, all the money that they invest and spend will eventually get exported as remittance to the home country of these workers. So the multiplier effect will actually get out of the country instead of multiplying inside the country. And finally, like I said before, Saudi Arabia has a terrible water problem, and both sports and tourism require a huge amount of water. And no matter how much oil they've got, water availability for such intense projects is going to be a very big challenge. So even if they manage to survive till 2070, after that, when the oil money is no longer available, what is Saudi Arabia going to do to get water? These are the challenges that Saudi Arabia is facing. So now, as students of business and economics, what remains to be seen is how will the government of Saudi Arabia recover from these challenges to build a robust and sustainable economy. This is the story, insight and challenges behind the Saudi economy and its football strategy. And I just hope you learned something valuable from this case study. That's all from my side for today, guys. I've attached all the study materials in the description. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye. And don't forget to download the multiple app from the link in the description.